A sunny afternoon at the park takes a shocking turn when two black sisters, Maya and Layla, are approached by a police officer who seems to have anything but good intentions. The girls are simply enjoying their day when the cop starts questioning them for no apparent reason. His tone sharpens, his demands escalate, and the situation quickly becomes tense. Maya, the older sister, tries to stay calm, but Layla's fear is evident. The officer's accusations grow more unreasonable, and it's clear he's targeting them for all the wrong reasons. Just as the situation seems to spiral out of control, their father, Mr. Carter, arrives at the scene. A man of principle and strength, he's not one to back down when his family is threatened. What happens next will leave you speechless as justice takes an unexpected turn. Stay tuned to see how this intense confrontation unfolds. As Mr. Carter approaches, he immediately notices the fear in his daughter's eyes and the tension in the air. The officer, tall and imposing, is standing far too close to the girls, his hand resting on his belt as if ready for confrontation. Mr. Carter keeps his voice steady but firm as he asks, "What seems to be the problem here?" The officer doesn't answer right away, his focus fixed on the girls. Maya steps forward, her voice trembling but determined, and explains they were just sitting on a bench when the officer started questioning them about why they were in the park. Mr. Carter's heart sinks as he realizes what's happening. His mind races back to the countless stories he's heard, moments just like this where innocence is overshadowed by prejudice. The officer, now addressing Mr. Carter, shifts his tone, but his words remain sharp. What is his real motive? Mr. Carter's calm demeanor doesn't go unnoticed, but the officer still seems intent on asserting control. He claims the girls matched a vague description of suspicious individuals seen nearby. Mr. Carter raises an eyebrow. Suspicious for sitting on a bench? In a public park? He asks, his voice steady but cutting. Maya clutches Layla's hand, trying to shield her little sister from the weight of the moment. Layla, usually bubbly and talkative, is silent, her wide eyes darting between her father and the officer. Meanwhile, a small crowd starts to gather, sensing the growing tension. Some pull out their phones, recording from a distance, while others whisper among themselves. The officer's stance tightens, clearly uncomfortable under the watchful eyes. But instead of de-escalating, he doubles down, demanding identification from everyone. Mr. Carter hesitates for a brief moment, not out of fear but out of strategy. How far would this officer go? And what could Mr. Carter do to protect his daughters without escalating the situation further? The officer's voice grows louder, demanding compliance as he steps closer to Mr. Carter, his body language rigid and intimidating. Mr. Carter doesn't flinch, his protective instincts kicking in as he keeps his daughters behind him. "You have no reason to harass my kids," he says firmly, his tone unwavering. The crowd grows larger now, with murmurs of support for Mr. Carter rippling through the onlookers. A few call out, questioning the officer's actions, but he ignores them, his focus locked on controlling the situation. Maya glances at her father, her heart racing as she sees the tension in his jaw. Layla clings to her, tears brimming in her eyes, while Maya whispers, "It'll be okay." But deep down, she's unsure. The officer radios for backup, his words sharp and clipped, escalating the situation even further. Then something shifts. From the edge of the crowd, a woman steps forward, holding her phone high, clearly live streaming the entire incident. Her voice rings out, steady and clear. "We're all watching, officer. This family deserves respect, not intimidation." The officer falters for just a moment, but it's enough to fuel the crowd's energy. All eyes are on him, the tension so thick it feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting for what will happen next. The officer's momentary hesitation disappears, and his voice takes on a defensive edge. "Everyone needs to step back," he commands, gesturing at the growing crowd. But the woman with the phone doesn't move, her steady filming a silent reminder that his actions are being watched by hundreds, maybe thousands, in real time. The officer shifts his stance, visibly agitated, But Mr. Carter stands his ground, refusing to be intimidated. Just then, a second police car pulls up, its flashing lights cutting through the tension. A new officer steps out, scanning the scene before walking over. "What's going on here?" he asks, his tone measured but curious. Before Mr. Carter can respond, the first officer starts speaking rapidly, framing the situation in a way that paints himself as the victim. But as he talks, something unexpected happens. Several voices from the crowd call out, contradicting his story. "That's not true." One man shouts, "We've been watching the whole time." The second officer looks uneasy, glancing at the phones pointed at them. Turning to Mr. Carter, he asks calmly, "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" For a moment, it feels like the tide is shifting. But before Mr. Carter can speak, the first officer interrupts, raising his voice, trying to regain control. The crowd stirs uneasily, the atmosphere charged with both hope and lingering tension. Something is about to give, but no one knows which way it will go. As the second officer listens to Mr. Carter's calm but firm explanation, the tension in the air is palpable. He describes how his daughters were minding their own business before being unfairly targeted. The crowd nods in agreement, their murmurs growing louder as the first officer's version of events unravels. The second officer glances at the phones recording every angle and realizes there's no room for mistakes. Just when it seems the situation might de-escalate, the first officer snaps, insisting he was justified in his actions. "I was just doing my job," he barks, his frustration boiling over. But before he can say more, one of the onlookers steps forward, a local lawyer who's been silently observing. Actually, the lawyer says coolly, "I've been recording everything too, and what you're describing doesn't match what happened. You've overstepped your authority, and this family deserves an apology." The crowd erupts in agreement, their voices growing louder as the first officer falters. The second officer, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, steps in. "That's enough," he says firmly to his colleague. Turning back to Mr. Carter, he extends an apology on behalf of the department, promising a full investigation. But just as relief washes over Mr. Carter and his daughters, there's a twist. Layla, still holding tightly to her sister, speaks up for the first time. Her small, trembling voice cuts through the noise. This isn't the first time he's done this. All eyes turn to her, and the crowd falls silent. Could there be more to this officer's behavior than anyone realized? Mr. Carter places a protective arm around his daughters, knowing the fight for justice might only be beginning. The crowd grows quiet as Layla's words hang in the air. The second officer looks at her with concern. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" he asks gently. Layla hesitates, looking to her father for reassurance. With a nod from Mr. Carter, she explains, "He's the same officer who made us leave the park last month, for no reason." The crowd murmurs, and the lawyer quickly steps forward again. "This needs to go on record," she says, taking note of Layla's statement. The first officer, now visibly uneasy, looks at the ground, realizing he's lost control of the narrative. The second officer assures Mr. Carter that the department will investigate the incident fully, and the family leaves the park together, holding their heads high. As they walk away, Mr. Carter reflects on the power of standing up for what's right. He knows the fight isn't over, but today, they took an important step toward justice.